Hello and welcome back to Kidocracy at Large. I am Siddhan Chandra, here every Saturday to speak about current events and collective conditions in the light of kidocracy. Kidocracy is a political action plan and educational philosophy that urges adults to be more like children, that is, to learn from children, and it urges the majority to become more like minorities, that is, to learn from minorities. And it declares the rule of minors and minorities. Kidocratic education is led by minors and minorities, aimed at adults and the majority. Kidocratic education is also aimed at the 99%, the minorities, who are divided and ruled by the 1%, the majority, so that we can integrate enough to be able to rule and regulate the 1%, the majority. How do minors and minorities educate? Through movements such as Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Idle No More, and Fridays for Future, and also through individual direct action. The most recent example being Paxton Smith, a high school valedictorian in Texas, who broke away from her graduation speech, scripted speech, in order to educate Texas on abortion rights. Last month, the state of Texas passed a law prohibiting abortion at 6 weeks, when it is too early to know if one is pregnant. Paxton Smith said, starting in September, there will be a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, regardless of whether the pregnancy was the result of rape or incest. She also said, I have dreams, hopes, and ambitions. Every girl here does. We have spent our whole lives working towards our futures, and without our consent or input, our control over our futures has been stripped away from us. I am terrified that if my contraceptives fail me, that if I'm raped, then my hopes and efforts and dreams for myself will no longer be relevant. She added, I hope you can feel how gut-wrenching it is, how dehumanizing it is to have the autonomy over your own body taken from you. How is this kidocratic? Paxton Smith, seizing the moment to highlight a burning issue, is highly creative. It is art, as per the value number 1 of kidocracy. Everyone is an artist. Popularized by Joseph Beuys, this phrase radically widens the very definition of art in order to make it available as a revolutionary force to everyone. According to Beuys, only art is capable of dismantling the repressive effects of a senile social system that continues to totter along the death line, to dismantle in order to build a social organism as a work of art. Paxton Smith's graduation address is a work of art, or an example of social sculpture, through which she is co-creating the total work of art of the future social order. She is not only educating youth, but addressing adults and the majority directly. Paxton Smith's action is also an example of minoritarianism, or becoming minor, which is a philosophical concept introduced by Deleuze and Guattari, who criticize the concept of majority, as follows in their book, 1,000 Plateaus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. The majority in a government presupposes the right to vote, and not only is established among those who possess that right, but is exercised over those who do not, however great their numbers. Similarly, the majority in the universe assumes as a pre-given the right and power of man. In this sense, women, children, but also animals, plants, and molecules are minoritarian. It is perhaps the special situation of women in relation to the man standard that accounts for the fact that becomings, being minoritarian, always pass through a becoming woman. For Deleuze and Guattari, becoming minoritarian is action, ethical action, taken to avoid becoming fascist. Paxton Smith is promoting minoritarianism by inviting people, her audience, to identify with, affiliate with the weaker entities, women and girls. She is inviting them to uphold the rights of minors and minorities. In affirming the rights of the weak, Paxton Smith is deschooling society, just as Greta Thunberg did when she went on strike to educate European governments to take urgent climate action. To clarify, Greta Thunberg's minoritarianism extends to the 1 million species at risk of extinction due to our overheating planet. To return to Paxton Smith, she is also modeling the kidocratic value number 5, the flight from molar to molecular. This is another anti-fascist concept that is promoted by Deleuze and Guattari. It is taken from atomic physics, in which measurements of the barely perceptible tiny entities are molecular, and aggregates of the same are molar. As per the Deleuze dictionary, in 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari apply the molar and molecular to political bodies. Molar entities belong to the state or the civic world. They are well defined, often massive, and are affiliated with the governing apparatus. Their molecular counterparts are microentities, politics that transpire in areas where they are rarely perceived, in the perception of affectivity, where beings share ineffable sensations, in the twists and turns of conversation having nothing to do with the state of the world at large, in the manner, too, that a pedestrian in a city park sees how the leaves of a linden tree might flicker in the afternoon light. Molar entities are institutional, like the state or the educational system or the family, with clearly defined hierarchy of power and modes of operation demanding compliance of those at the bottom. When the state of Texas, in the stranglehold of the Christian right, forces its Christian values, majoritarian values, on minorities and minors, it is being fascist. So we see how Paxton Smith has not only educated the majority, the Christian majority of Texas, but also addressed the minorities to enlist their support for the molecular entities being oppressed by the majoritarian state. Here, I want to speak of The recent discovery of the remains of 215 indigenous children on the grounds of a former residential school run by the Roman Catholic Church between 1890 and 1978. To quote from the Guardian article, it was part of a cross-Canada network of residential schools created to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children by removing them from their homes and communities and forbidding them from speaking their native languages or performing cultural practices. Physical, emotional, and sexual abuse were rampant within these institutions, as was forced labor. Forced labor. Forced labor. The common element in how the Indigenous people were treated by the colonial Canadian government and how women and girls are being treated by today's Texas government. Forced motherhood, forced labor, promoted as Christian virtue. I first heard of residential schools while attending Idle No More events in Toronto that began in 2013. I learned of how the federal government's stated intention was to remove the Indian from the child through the residential schooling system. I also learned that the government, the colonial government, banned potlatches, Indigenous festivals, as reckless, wasteful, and unchristian. Both the state and church united as molar powers to assimilate the molecular entities that were native children. And the Idle No More movement itself had erupted to reject Prime Minister Stephen Harper's neoliberal agenda of opening up tribal lands for extraction and development. Forced extractive capitalism was carrying on the job of the colonial state and the church. Forced extractive capitalism that continues apace. I saw a similarity between how the Canadian government treats Indigenous people and how adults treat children. Just as the Canadian government tries to assimilate the Indigenous people into hardworking, mainstream Christian society, adults recruit children into hardworking adulthood. It was this understanding that led me to articulate kidocracy as a de-residential schooling of Canada and deschooling society. Movements that followed, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Fridays for Future, all stressed the importance of unlearning the habits of 2,000 years of labor extraction from the poor in general, Black people, women, and children. These movements and many others rounded out kidocracy as a rejection of any form of forced labor, as a call for the rule of minors and minorities, and as anti-fascist education aimed at adults and the majority. Till next week, bye.